Mike, can we go to the podium? Can you over the podium for us? Can you go to the podium just tell us your thoughts about this? I hate it.
We need a quotable line.
Well, I'm very, very flattered to have been chosen for this. The other two guys are every bit as good as me or better. And I just got the short straw or the long straw, whatever it is, and I'm delighted to do it. I enjoyed the last flight. I'm hoping this will be an exact repetition, just a little tall, a little higher. And I'm looking forward to it very, very much. I'm ready to go, boy. I am ready to go, and we are going to win the X Prize. Put your money on it.
What are your grandchildren think?
No, that's good. Thank you. At this time, we're going to open it up to Bert Rutan and Paul Allen. If I can ask you to state your name, news agencies that you're with, and I'll go ahead and call on you, and Bert and Paul at a time. Go ahead down the front here. Your name and agency.
Bert and Paul. We asked you this question many years ago when we were here for Voyager, but why? What is the significance of this in your mind, and why are you doing this?
The question is, why are we doing this? I met with Paul in his office many years ago. He invited me in for lunch, and we talked about a vision. We talked about the fact that this would be an important thing to do if it could inspire and open up a new industry. And I think we shared a common belief that unless it happens, that there'll be decades more of just government trying to, what's happened the last 2 or 3 decades is not the kind of progress that is going to help me, because I've already got this gray hair.
Paul,
What's your, why are you interested in
No. Go ahead, news agency.
David Rhodes from the BBC. This was how long before we can affordably get tourists into space?
I've been known during this program as not telling you anything about what's going to happen. But I have said recently, and I'll say it again, that in 10 to 15 years, there will be affordable suborbital flights like the flight that you see today. I'm not going to, excuse me, we have been studying that extensively. And certainly one of my deliverables for this program to my customer was very specific direct operating costs on what it takes to fly recurring flights to send 3 people to space. So we have very good direct operating cost data. But I'm not a businessman. I'm not a person that runs the airline. I think while the airline's being run, I'll be over working on orbital or going to the moon or something like that. So I'm not the one to ask that
Question back over here. Your name and agency? Yeah, sorry.
Miles O'Brien with the Andrew, Bert and Paul. Bert, I've talked to you about this before. I know you sort of embrace risk as something that's part of this business, but as best as you can, could you assess the risk that lies ahead tomorrow? And if you could, if something goes wrong, what kind of a setback would that be for the ultimate cause of getting civilians in space?
Well, first of all, I took risks on this program that I didn't have to take. The most noticeable and most obvious from the outside is that we developed an entirely new type of feathered re-entry that allowed us to, unlike the X-15 or the shuttle, we can plunge directly into the atmosphere and do it safely. The benefits of taking that risk are that we have a spaceship that does not have to be controlled during re-entry, and that has enormous safety implications. However, I took big risks to go out and research that and identify that and then validate that. My point here is that if you don't take risks, you won't find the breakthroughs that give you the cost and safety benefits in the future. As far as the risk on this next flight, I'm not staying up nights worrying about it. I personally believe that we took more risk on the May flight because we went from subsonic all the way to 1.9 Mach number in our feathered reentry. And I personally consider that our biggest step that we took in terms of learning new things on one given flight. I believe personally that the risks we'll take tomorrow are small compared to the risks that we took in May.
We have a question over here from the
Would you like to address
economist.
the risk issue then, Mr. Allen? Would you mind?
Sure. I think you've gotten the sense from Bert that all the risks that are being undertaken are very closely assessed, but there always remains an element of risk involved in any kind of project involving rocketry. And my hat's off to the test pilots that fly these vehicles, because they are undertaking a certain amount of risk to do so. But they're doing so hoping to further these kinds of initiatives. So again, my hat's off to them.
We have a question over from the economist here.
Hi,
Your name?
Natasha, though, you can come here. Is it
From
true?
The Economist,
Yeah.
can I compliment you? That was a very well-written article that you wrote.
Thank you very much, Mr. Can I have an interview, please? I've been asking for a year. I've been trying to get an interview for a year, so it would have been even better if I could have spoken to you. The question I have now is it true that you're not solving many of the technological problems related to getting beyond Mach 3 in terms of actually getting into space proper? And if that's the case, how, this design of vehicle that you have, how far could you take it?
Let me point out that we had decided a long time ago that if I was going to move up from subsonic airplanes and light planes into a spaceship, that doing suborbital space flights was a proper step to orbital flights. If I had built a vehicle that on its first flight had to reach orbit, my risk would have been larger because I couldn't do incremental testing. Answer to your question, what we have learned in terms of structure and environmental control systems and a whole bunch of the systems on the ship are lessons learned that will help us on an orbital vehicle. We are seeing advantages, in fact, to using the feathered reentry for orbital vehicles. And while that was not something that was intended, it was something that fell out that I think would go in that line. Now, we are not taking, we're not learning any lessons learned on thermal protection for an orbital vehicle. That's clearly the case.
Let's go ahead.
The fact that we launch from airborne instead of take off with a rocket on the ground is an enormous safety benefit, because the most dangerous place to operate a rocket is at ground level, and any kind of small problem there is real bad. But air launch is an enormous safety difference for us.
There are some members of the media also outside in attend. I'm wondering if maybe we could pipe in and get a question from them.
Okay.
I'm really sorry about
Eric?
Can you hear us?
We can hear you. I can't hear the
Okay.
question.
Talk a lot further.
Right.
We'll go ahead and, Tom, while we're waiting, let's go ahead with Tom Paulson from the PI, Seattle PI.
Seattle PI. I was wondering who owns SpaceShipOne and the associated technologies developed.
Well, there's a corporation that owns the technology, and I think it's one of the assets of the programs that we've developed, and hopefully the technologies we've developed will be used in follow-on projects.
Yeah. Who owns the corporation?
There is a corporation called Mojave Aerospace, and I brought some intellectual property to it, but that company's majority value is the funding that Paul brought to it. So we both have equity in it. I'm very minor.
Back here.
I'm
sorry, up in the last row.
Yeah.
Your name and stuff.
My name is Kimberly O'Science with CNN. Obviously, you have this enormous vested interest, enormous amount of funding already in place. It's clearly not just the X Prize, but we're looking to the future to make space affordable. But can you speak a little bit to what next for this group and plans for your offering?
Well, I think right now, we're focused on, obviously tomorrow's a milestone flight, but then after that, we're focused on making the X Prize flights. After that, I think that opens up a whole host of opportunities to do other things. we'll be evaluating whether having partnerships to support some of those makes sense, because obviously as you scale up the envelope, the costs go up correspondingly too, so it becomes a much more large scale effort.
One of our lessons learned from doing this program is it is a very good idea to not reveal to the media what we're doing until we have to. Because if I had to do this, even occasionally, we'd be a year behind. So you're not likely to find out what we're going to do next until we have to push it outside where that spy gets a camera and takes a picture and puts it in Aviation Week.
All right, over here.
And then we're ready.
Okay,
Bill
next one.
Harwood with CBS News. Bert, I know the X Prize is the ultimate goal here on the road to turning this into or maybe it's not. Well, let me go ahead, because that's really not the thrust of the question. Tomorrow's flight, from the history book perspective, will be the one that gets written down and people will read about a long time from now, is the first privately funded manned spacecraft to reach space. How do you look at that in the context of history, going all the way back to Mercury, and say where your flight stands in that historical context?
Okay. Well, first of all, the first question, no, we don't think that that's our ultimate goal of this program. When Paul and I talked about what to do, the X Prize hadn't even been funded, or it wasn't even known actually when we first started talking about it. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, you are seeing the pinnacle of our program tomorrow. The pinnacle is a demonstration that you can very safely and with very low operating cost fly people up and let them look at the black sky and go weightless and do this performance. The X Prize, to me, is something that we ought to do because it's a significant return on the investment, but it's not why we're doing it.
I understand that, but I mean the historical context.
To answer that, I have to look back in at 1908 when airplanes were, when there had only been 10 people that had flown. And something phenomenal happened in 4 years. It went from the number of people that had flown in airplanes being this little group over here in the corner, 10 or 12. In 4 years, in 39 countries, there were hundreds of airplane new types, and there were thousands of pilots. And very quickly, they did barnstorming for a little bit, and then very quickly we had mail planes, warplanes, and airliners. But can you imagine that in only 4 years, something could spring up from nothing and all of that happened? And I believe that the reason that it happened so quickly was when Wilbur went to Paris and he flew his airplane, and the Europeans who had thought he was lying, they watched him do turns, and they watched him fly for a long time. They watched him do multiple flights a day, and I believe the significant thing is they all said at the same time, that is something that I can do because these guys are just bicycle shop guys. And I'll tell you, if NASA, for example, was flying this flight tomorrow, it's not noticed. So there's no significance of this flight. I think we'd have a much smaller crowd here if NASA was going to do a suborbital space flight tomorrow. The significance is the realization that, hey, this is for us to do now. This is not only for governments to do. So I believe our real significance of this program is that realization, and I believe that realization will attract investment, and that realization will attract a whole bunch of activity, and very soon it'll be affordable for you to fly.
Let's go out and try a question outside one more time.
Louise Pennell from Seven Network Australia. When NASA launches missions, they have help from all around the world, including Australia. Is tomorrow's mission to highlight the inefficiencies of the government departments and or highlight the fact that you can do it on your own without government assistance?
Well, I think that the point is that, you know, with a relatively modest budget, you could do. I remember you can do something like this, and that means that there's a way forward for future initiatives, whether it's something that Bert and I work on, we work on with other partners or other people do, that you can take off-the-shelf technology, put it together in an incredibly creative way, which Burton's team came up with, to do something like this. I remember watching Alan Shepard's Mercury flight, the suborbital flight, back, what year was that? 61? Okay, I remember watching that in grade school, how inspiring that was. We hope this generates the same kind of inspiration for more private vehicles, private flights, that can give people the experience of space, and we can keep expanding the envelope from there. I think that's how I would restate it.
What's that?
Question for Lloyd.
Go ahead. Your name?
My name is Pascal. For Paul, can you talk about entrepreneurial visions that might have formed in your mind as you've seen this project now come closer to fruition? Like in the next 5 years, what kind of industry or industries would you like to see spring up around this project?
Well, I think it's not just this project, but there's a number of teams working on things like this too. I think we're showing that we're poised to make this milestone flight tomorrow. But I think anything like this that gives many people the opportunity to experience space, to experience this kind of flight, that will in turn generate more momentum for further initiatives and expand the envelope, whether it's orbital flights or more suborbital, commercial suborbital space tourism kind of operations that anybody could sign up for. Those are the kinds of things we're hoping to engender.
Okay, I've got one over here, and then I'll get to you, but back here.
Rogers, Las Vegas Review Journal. Did you ever consider using the Nevada test site as a spaceport? There's been some talk about it. There's been some interest with Kistler and Venture Star. The first mile is free.
I think we'd certainly consider that. It's an excellent site. It's one in which we could easily qualify for an AST launch license. The reason we did Mojave is we live here, and we found also that we could qualify as that. However, there's another reason that I feel particularly personally proud that we're doing it in Mojave, and that is I wouldn't be using one of the government or quasi-government runways or facilities. Mojave is a commercial airport, and it's managed by Stu Witt over here in the yellow shirt, and he will have something to say to you tomorrow that's important. But I'll tell you, that guy right there is determined to show, and he's doing a very good job of it, to show that a small commercial airport can have manned spaceflight activities. And if you don't do it in a small commercial airport, then you have enormous costs.
We've got a question down here. Go ahead.
Hey, Mark Daniels with SilverStateNews.com. Ever since spaceflight began, there's been a very real, very intense, growing interest in spaceflight by children.
Yes.
For us, the child of the 60s, it's not possible because of the limited nature of launches and stuff like that. But now with the commercial projects, you have spaceflight that is real, tangible, and achievable by children, not in the latter part of their lifetime, but actually in their early adulthood. So the question is, what have your contacts been with the children of the world about SpaceShipOne project, and what are you telling them their future in spaceflight is?
Well, first of all, a lot of the letters that we get are children that have enormous hope, but they say as they get older, they realize that hope is not founded, that it really isn't any more encouraging for them to go to space than it was the month of the John Glenn flight. It really isn't. And in fact, a lot of people tell us that when that happened, when all that wonderful stuff happened in only 8 years in the 60s, right then they decided that they're going to go to the moon in their lifetimes, or they're going to go to the planets. The longer we go without getting affordability, the harder that dream will look. And I think it will dim in our children's minds. I think children are the most important reason for doing this. And I think once affordable space flight starts, that families will think that it's important to give their children the opportunity, even more important than themselves, because it will change that child's ambition. It will change his, just everything about him that leads towards doing something great in his life, we believe will be better if he gets the opportunity to float and look at the black sky.
We have a question from Reed Stevenson from Reuters.
Reed Stevenson from Reuters. How many more times can SpaceShipOne go up? And related to that, I mean, what's the useful life cycle of the vehicles?
Well, when we do get ready to do the X Prize flights, we will be ready to fly 3 flights, not 2. And the reason is we can fly SpaceShipOne in a little quicker than 1 week. In other words, we can fly 3 flights in 2 weeks, the way we're set up right now. So we could conceivably fly it every week. In fact, one of the proposals that I gave to Mr. Allen back in March of 2001, it included what we called Task 21, and that was that we would fly it every week for 5 months. And what that would do, it was give us a lot more data on our operating costs. We jointly decided not to have that one funded and to find out how it flew first.
We have a question back here from MSNBC.
Just to follow up, sorry.
Quick follow-up.
Paul, do you want to go up in it?
I think if you grew up as a kid in the '60s and you see the kinds of rocket, the NASA missions, then to have something like this available as an option, it's pretty exciting. Obviously, if you're also a prudent person, you'd like to see. And these are test flights. You'd like to see a lot more flights. You'd like to see flights with passengers and so forth. The envelope expanded anymore, and the reliability proved that even greater degree.
Let me go back here to
point out the White Knight has an identical cockpit to the spaceship, and it's always flown with 2 or 3 people. Every flight that the SpaceShipOne has ever flown, and including tomorrow's flight, is an envelope expansion flight. And when you go out and stretch the envelope, go to where you can, it's not very prudent to carry passengers.
Let me take one back here, and then after this, we're going to go outside to the tent. But let's go ahead with this one.
Alan Boyle with MSNBC. Bert, I wanted to ask, some of your rivals are saying they don't think that you'd be able to go up to 62 miles with the pilot and 2 passengers. What do you have to say to that doubt?
I can say that we have plenty of performance, and I can say also that if Mike doesn't shut off the motor tomorrow when he's supposed to, that performance-wise we'll go to about 420,000 feet tomorrow. And we're working with the same propellant load that we've flown for all 3 flights. That doesn't mean that we could fly to 420,000 feet tomorrow, because there's other technical issues rather than how much performance we have. And that is how much air load we have on the vehicle when the motor does burn out, because we control it with its fins. So we wouldn't prudently fly it that high tomorrow, okay? But because the envelope expansion tomorrow is not so much how fast we can go and how high we can go and what Mach number for re-entry, the most important envelope expansion for us tomorrow is how the vehicle is controlled when the rocket motor is still running, but the indicated airspeed is lower. And that's the envelope expansion that we're most concerned about, and that is that we are going to be flying at a lower indicated speed or pressure speed than we've flown with a rocket motor.
Eric,
we have plenty of performance.
Yeah, we do. We have 2 questions and 1 from a student reporter, so let's get to the first one.
Okay, 2 questions from the tent.
Greg Clerk's writing for New Scientist magazine. What contact have you had with NASA in the context of the SpaceShipOne project? What contact would you like to have after tomorrow's success? And is anyone from NASA attending the event?
Yes, NASA will be attending the event. This morning I got a call from Scott Horowitz. I guess the space people know him. He's flown in the other space agency is NASA. He's flown 4 shuttle flights, and he's on his way here in a T-38, and that's the first contact I've had with NASA relative to this event. We did not notify NASA of what we were doing. They found out about it at the rollout like you did. And the reason is we found that every time we went to NASA for help, getting their help meant that I couldn't stay under the budget that I'd promised Mr. Allen. So we decided very early that we had to do this all on our own.
Another question from the tent.
Lindsay Carlson from Barry Essential News for Kids, and I'm 11 years old. So far, men, women, chimps, dogs, insects, and even tomato plants have all been in space. When will kids go into space?
Well, as I mentioned about 12 minutes ago, I really think that that's extremely important. And I believe that that will happen at the time. First of all, there will be earlier barnstorming-like flights, you know, these crazy $100,000 stuff, relatively soon. But I don't look at that as space tourism. I look at it when you have a mature industry that's going to be flying people on this flight for more like $30,000 to $50,000, something like that. And I believe that on the second generation, that'll be around $10,000 or $12,000. But I think in that area, we're going to see a lot of kids that do get to fly, and I think it's a very good idea for you to fly.
Okay, I'm going to take one more from the tent, but then we'll come back to this reporter back in the back. But let's go with the tent question.
Greg Sedition from astroexpo.com. My question is, I assume that this vehicle is as a foam and composite construction like many of your other vehicles, Mr. Rattan. Do you see that, first of all, as being a big step in terms of qualifying a new type of structure for going into space? And second of all, do you see that as being able to be carried forward into future designs, or is something else going to be needed?
Well, our ship is essentially 100% carbon fiber, graphite structure. We've been doing that for a long time with our airplanes. The first airplane that I built the second airplane that I built in the mid-70s was all composite. If this were built with well, first of all, the reason I don't build it out of aluminum or steel or titanium or these things is that I don't know how. I was careful to not spend a lot of time trying to learn how to do that and how to tool that. We do have very good ways of tooling and building composite airplanes, and it's just our knitting. That's what we know how to do. But if it were built out of aluminum, it would have to be significantly bigger, and its rocket engine would probably be something like 20% more expensive if the vehicle was built out of aluminum. And just for that reason only, I think it's a very good thing to do.
Okay, let's go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah.
Chris Watson, USA Today. Could you talk a bit about how you chose Mike Melville out of 4B
How I chose Mark Melville. Well, the beauty is I didn't. That was a decision by Doug Shane, who's our Chief of Test Operations. And Doug Shane has the Kinchlow Trophy, which is the most prestigious award from the Society of Vehicle Test Pilots. And I'll tell you, a lot better than I at setting up a training program and setting up an assessment program and looking at the very close details on what one pilot might do versus another to provide the success and so on. He does run those by me for my coordination, but I cannot think of a time in the, we started here in 1974. I cannot think of a time that a chief of flight ops have come to me and recommended that a certain person fly, and I told him, no, I want this guy to fly. I don't believe in doing that, and I've never have done it.
We've got a question back here with the red band. Yeah, that's you. Yeah. Name and organization.
Cecilia from ABC News. Both of you describe your feelings. I mean, right now, is it concern, excitement, fear? Are you praying? Are you crossing your fingers? What are you doing? What are you feeling?
No, I think it's excitement. I mean, I think we've talked about the risks a little bit, so there's always a certain amount of nervousness you have, but I think it's more excitement than anything else. To be able to participate in my case, work with Bert and be behind the effort, and when you see the pilot enter the vehicle, take off, and go up to altitude, you see their mission control, you're watching all the, basically laptops are connected together with real-time data from all the systems on the building. You've got a real-time video feed looking forward, so you can see the vehicle, and it's very, very exciting. All the winds aloft have to be right for us to do the drop for the launch. So you're monitoring all these things. Bert's surveying the scene tomorrow and asking the different people managing the different systems, and everything is in the green. And then when the engine lights and thing, it's going straight up at Mach. What's going to be Mach 3.2 or so? 3 Mach straight up at Mach 3.2, and you're behind something like that. It's just incredibly exciting. And you know, again, I mean, I hope so. You've seen the vehicle and realize all the technology. People have asked about the technology. I mean, to come up with something like this, all the not only the shell of the vehicle, all the avionics, the fuel tank, the engine, all built out of composite materials, all tested rigorously. I mean, I think you saw the team here. I mean, amazing. These people did amazing work to make this possible, and all of it's working together, you know, pretty much flawlessly. And the envelope can be expanded with every flight. So just knowing all those factors, it's incredibly exciting.
Plus, there's absolutely nothing else to do in Mojave.
Hey, real quick, I'm going to go over here, and then we're going to go out to the tent for a couple more.
Leonard David with Space.com. Paul, it's fascinating looking at your bio with search for extraterrestrial intelligence. You put some money in there.
Well, if they're not going to come here, we might as well.
And then SpaceShipOne, putting some money into SpaceShipOne. What's the crossover in your mind? What's the interest in Sky, including Jimi Hendrix and I'll Kiss This Guy and all the things that he's talking about?
I guess there's a theme in a number of my projects. You know, I try to do things that that should be done, or in the case of the SETI project, that was a government-funded project, and the funding was basically cut off or extremely reduced. So, so I'm funding the SETI initiative in Hack Creek, California, where they're doing a big array that used for conventional astronomy and to listen for SETI signals. This particular opportunity just came up because a friend of mine made me aware of the opportunities that might exist, and he said, if you're doing anything like this, you've got to talk to Bert. So Bert and I talked, we hit it off, and Bert started, instantly started sketching things on a napkin and explained to me the dynamics involved, and of course everything's evolved tremendously since then, but that's how these things, I just want to give you a sense of how these things get started. So I'm looking to do things that are crying out to be done but haven't been done.
Did you keep that napkin?
I don't know.
I want to point out that Paul's is absolutely right. There's enormously important synergies here. Because on the Tier 3 program, we'll need to know about their VORs for our approach. Sorry, forget it. Well, what was the question again?
Let's go. We've got two more questions out in the tent. We want to make sure that we get input from there, so go ahead with those.
Hi, Rob Perlman from CollectSpace.com. Every manned spaceflight since Gagarin has carried small mementos into space. Will tomorrow's flight be carrying any souvenirs, and if so, what?
You might notice that the SpaceShipOne does not look like a NASCAR race car. Save that for the X Prize flights. There'll be all kinds of things that are appropriate to that kind of stuff, and people to pay back and whatever. But from the start, we've made it. We think that the historical significance of this is very important, and that it is watered down if this program looks like it's out there to try to sell something. And there is nothing here trying to sell something. We're not using advertising or trinkets to try to get a return on investment for this program, because we think by itself the historical significance of doing it to let the focus, and again, you guys deal with the focus, to let the focus be on the milestone rather than on that sort of thing.
One more from the tent outside.
Paul Douglas, Space Operations Communicator. Is SpaceShipOne scalable?
Yes.
We're gonna take a few more here, and then we've got to wrap it up. But just a few more. So, no, back here. Yes, ma'am. No, behind you. Yep.
I'm Irene Fox with the Discovery Channel and UPI. I wanted to ask Mr. Allen, first of all, regulatory hurdles than you have with air launching and using a civilian base to start with. If you could please address where you see the government still needs to kind of move out of the way to enable this new industry to take off. Thank you.
Well, to start off with is the reasons that we chose air launch and a glide back landing and feathered entry were mostly to do with safety, but they were also important because they let us provide better protection of the non-involved public than other types of profiles or other types of vehicles. So that was important too, that we knew that we wouldn't run into licensing issues. In fact, until we were halfway through our development, I fully expected to not need a launch license and to operate my airplane under the experimental airworthiness certificate. And in fact, we flew the December flight and we went through our maximum Q, we went supersonic straight up without any launch license. So I never thought that regulatory was an issue for me. I do have some things that we have that are lessons learned for the regulatory. Lessons learned as it relates to the ability for those doing research and development to do what we do. And also I have some feelings about how the government's role should be in certification and operating of space airlines. But I'm going to hold my remarks on that until I'm done with this program, because I want to get all the lessons learned in before I open my mouth on it.
I've got a follow-up.
Paul, do you want to address the first
As far as
question?
my funding of other teams, no, I haven't funded the other teams. I looked at a few websites just so I could understand the lay of the land, the terrain. But no, I mean, once you get behind a team like Bert's and you're rooting for them to succeed, working with them, you wouldn't fund anybody else.
I've got a follow-up.
Let's go over here with the gentleman with the press packet.
Jim Spellman for Adastra Magazine of the National Space Society. This past Wednesday, the President's Commission on the Implementation of U.S. Space Policy was released. I dare say that there was more media at this activity than there was at that activity this past week. One of the points made in the report is the Centennial Challenge.
Report?
Yes, the Aldrich Commission. Part of that report talks about the Centennial Challenge as far as government-sponsored competitions. Given your criticism of government-sponsored space programs, does this mean that you're not going to be looking at a Centennial Challenge effort after X Prize?
Government has put up proper large rewards for technical accomplishment. The last one that I can think of that worked well was called the British Royalty Prize, in order to allow navigators of the ocean to determine their longitude. And that was a government prize. The successful prizes since then have been prizes that were funded by people like Ortega and Kramer and so on. I haven't looked at the Centennial NASA Prize thing at all, and I'll reserve my comments until I see how they actually structure that. I feel very strongly that if someone puts up a prize, they should identify a goal that's important to them and worth that much money, and they should not communicate with the competitors, and they should be totally out of the picture until someone wins. And I believe that's the only way a prize can work. Peter Diamandis didn't even know about my program. He found out about it at the rollout the same time everybody else did. And if Peter Diamandis came in to try to help me with the safety of my program because he put this money up, we wouldn't be here today.
Down here in front. Your name and organization.
Can I ask you, what type of box do you think you're opening here? Do you think we're going to see what you're trying to do tomorrow being very commonplace in the immediate future?
I've made my remarks on that I want to publish now, so all I ask you to do is stay tuned. I think it's going to be interesting. I believe there will be a lot of activity.
And Paul, could I just ask you, roughly how much is this costing you?
In excess of $20 million.
Okay, over here, yeah, go ahead.
Liz Wild, Time Magazine. Bert, can you tell us what was on that napkin that you originally drew for Paul Allen and how your design process has evolved?
The spaceship is model number 316. The White Knight is model number 318. I will be making a presentation very quick of a model number 346. Those are just numbers that I put on the napkins when the napkins are first drawn. Those are not things that fly. We've developed something like 39 or 40 new manned airplane types, and we've developed a lot of unmanned airplanes and projects which we also put numbers on. But those numbers and those napkins are when the thought looks like it's something that makes sense to specify and draw out on a 3-view, and that's my way of keeping track of it. The napkin will not be presented to the media until the spaceship resides in the Air and Space Museum in Washington.